Welcome to the Spiral of the Rose podcast with our friends Kelli and Bri.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Spiral of the Rose podcast. Today we're going to be diving into the history and the origins of Imbolc and why is it an important celebration in the Wheel of the Year as we go through these different celebrations throughout the year, bringing to your attention why these celebrations were even celebrated, what's the origin of them, how they began, what is basically the divine feminine significance behind these different celebrations, right? So Imbolc is known as the midway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere. So it's celebrated, it starts on February 1st and it goes through February 2nd in most places. And the main goddess that is celebrated in Imbolc is Brigid. And Brigid is the goddess of spring, the goddess of fertility, of new life. She's considered to be the bringer of life and also a master of healing. So she was especially honored in terms of when it came to matters of prophecy and divination, and also, like I mentioned, the fertility and the bringer of life, and just like it was a very much a big celebration when they sort of were preparing for that spring coming, right? They were preparing for the abundance, the fertility, the return of the plants, the return of the animals, you know, the birthing of animals, like everything was what they were preparing for in this celebration, even though it's still like very cold on February 1st and 2nd, and we're still like in the middle of winter. We're like, really, we're celebrating spring right now. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because people really relied on the land and they relied on those crops returning for their livelihood. They relied on more animals being born in order to, you know, to get more things that they needed, whether they were using them for products or milk or, you know, different things. So today we're going to be talking about Imbolc a little bit to just kind of dive into that, and also sort of like what you can do around this time to prepare yourself for the coming spring, right? What are some of the practices you could do? What are some of the things you can start thinking about during this time?
Yeah. And I love, when I was sort of doing a little bit of research on it, I know that, you and I have talked about Imbulk for like a couple of years now, like about all of these parts of the Wheel of the Year, but I still did my research because I was like, make sure I actually know what I'm talking about. And I'm not just, randomly saying stuff. But I loved, there's four, I mean, there are more of like the pagan or the ancient Wheel of the Year pieces. There's more than four, but there are four main ones. And Imbulk is one of the four main ones. And it's where we go from, we've got a light half of the year and a dark half of the year. But within those, there's a dark half of the light half and there's a light half of the dark half, right? And so we're moving into the light half of the dark half of the year. And so it makes sense. Yes, like you said, we're not really into spring yet, all of that. But I think one of the biggest things was that, especially back in the day, and worshiping goddesses and things like this, it was like, we're going to celebrate this. And, I don't know whether they necessarily made sacrifices. Maybe in some cultures they did, maybe in some they didn't, but there was a lot of celebration around the goddess at this point, because it's like calling in the spring, right? It's like, we're going to celebrate, we're going to give you offerings, we're going to, do all of this because we want you to bring spring. We're done with winter now, right? So we're calling it in ahead of time. And really that's what we're talking about in like what we're going to do, what you can do at this time of year to prepare for spring, right? And that's really what it came down to. And there was a lot of traditions tied into it where they would create what's called the Brigid's cross. They would hang those in their home, and that was to call in blessings. That was, all symbolic and whatnot. And we were talking a little bit about that before we started recording, about like what that actually is, because I was wondering, like, how do they have a cross? Like, was this a celebration that came in after Christianity? And we actually looked into it, and it's actually the other way around. And not necessarily Christianity, but I would say, like we were discussing, the Romans kind of took over the idea of the cross. The cross was actually used in, like, there's the Celtic cross, which is a symbol of Odin, which is a Norse god, right? So there's and used in multiple cultures, not necessarily just the Norse, right? But it was something that was used for a really long time before Christianity was using crosses as like a crucifixion thing, right? So
Yeah.
it was actually the Romans took from these earlier cultures, and then that was where it ended up being incorporated into Christianity and used as a punishment tool versus a worship tool, right? And it's really interesting to me that a lot of Christian religions use the cross as a worship tool, even though for them it's like, well, they're like, the Son of God was crucified on it, right? So it's very, my mind has a hard time with it. I'm like, why are we worshiping this thing? Why is this something we want to look at and worship? And I know that it's just supposed to symbolize Jesus in general, right? Not necessarily we're worshiping his death, but we're worshiping him. But it's I find it really interesting that now they worship, and they don't worship the cross, but they worship using the cross as a tool, right? And I found it really fascinating when we looked into that, where it was like, actually, and you mentioned in Egypt as well, the Ankh is based on that same cross shape. It has the loop at the top, but it's very similar, right? And it's based on life and instead of on death, right? So it was a complete switch over from the Romans, but it was in both cases before the Romans, and now, even now, after it was used as a symbol for death, now it's worshipped or used in worship, just like it was used in worship back then, right? It symbolizes that life, and it's a tool in our worship. So I thought that was really fascinating. Sorry for the tangent.
No, yeah, I was actually going to mention the ancient Egypt, because I found that like one of the most fascinating points that I researched was how the Ankh does represent life, right? And the modern cross, I will call it a modern cross in modern religions. It's meant to represent Jesus died on the cross for people's sins, right? So to me, like, as a person, as somebody who was raised in the Catholic religion, I was always like sort of like creeped out by the cross. I was always creeped out by like the stations of the cross that we had to look at, like every Easter, every season before Easter, like they had all of the stations of the cross in the church, and like we had to go around and like look at them, and it was basically the crucifixion of Christ. And I'm like, why am I looking at this? I'm a kid. Like, I don't want to look at these. They give me nightmares. Like, this is awful. Like, I don't want to do it.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, so I was always,
and the Mormon church doesn't use the cross in their worship.
So yeah, I was always so put off by that. I'm like, why are we even looking at these? And so I always associated a cross with like something negative, because it's like they killed Jesus. So yeah, totally different meaning from like what it was in the ancient cultures and the ancient, I'll call them ancient religions or ancient practices or cultures, right? It's kind of interchangeable as to what they were.
Yeah. And actually, that's so fascinating, because I think that is one of the reasons why the Mormon church doesn't use it as a tool in their worship. It's and that's why I said, like, it doesn't make sense to me that people would use this in their worship, because it seems like this tool of destruction, of like, death and whatever, right? So that's more along the lines of like how I felt about it, being raised in a Christian church that didn't use a cross at like it, that
Mhm.
was one of the big differences. Right. And, anyway, this is kind of a sidetrack, but
Yeah.
I thought it was so fascinating. And it did feature largely in their celebrations, right? They would weave these crosses out of rushes. They're a little bit skewed. They're not the exact same shape. I know you guys can't see us, but they're not the exact same shape as like a Christian cross would be.
Mhm.
They kind of angle a little bit differently, and it's got like a diamond center.
Yeah.
And all the four sides are the same length. So it is shaped differently. But it was just so fascinating. And it was something that they would hang in their houses to call in those blessings. And
Yeah.
it was a big part of this celebration. And, you know, on that same sort of a tangent is the fact that, and this will feature probably in a lot of our talk about the different celebrations, because most of them were incorporated in this way. So, but starting with this one, for example, Imbolc now is celebrated as St. Brigid's Day, especially in like Gaelic versions of Christianity. So like Irish Christians and stuff like that, especially. But a lot of the time, so what was happening back then, the reason that these things got incorporated into Christianity is because they were pagan holidays, right? So you would think, well, the Christians didn't want the pagan stuff, so why did they bring this into their culture? But what happened was they wanted people to get on board with Christianity, and these people weren't willing to let go of their culture and their history and the things that were important to them. So their celebrations being brought into Christianity made it possible for them to convert, because it was like, well, as long as I still get to celebrate. So instead of Goddess Brigid, now we're celebrating Saint Brigid, right? But it kind of, and probably behind closed doors or behind the scenes or whatever, these people probably still celebrated her as the Goddess Brigid, at least for like a generation or two, you know, and then eventually that faded out into Saint Brigid, and she stopped being a goddess in the eyes of everybody, right? So, or of, you know, anybody following that faith. But that was the main way for these more modern religions to sort of incorporate the paganism, just so that these pagans would come over and convert, right? And that was because they wanted everybody to convert. That they wanted their religions to grow. They wanted to, you know, whether that has to do with money in the first place or whatever the case may be, or really just deeply believing, like, I don't know, but that was their main tool for converting the pagans, was to incorporate those into the Christian faith. So yeah.
Yeah, and not to go off on a tangent, but I, over Christmas break, read 2 historical fiction novels about Egypt. And Isis, so the goddess Isis in Egypt, basically was turned into the depiction of Mary in the Christian faith. And that, like, I heard of that before, but it went into more details around that in those books. And my mind was just blown, right? Because I'm like, oh my goodness, like, yes, like it's just, if you read the story, it's like, it fits. So even some statues of Isis were converted into icons of Mary, like when they were doing the conversion, like the switch over to Christianity. And in the story of Isis, Osiris, and their son Horus, so there's a lot of comparisons to Horus to Jesus, and like between that relationship. So it's like, when you start to think about these things, there was a lot of points in history where there were divine feminine figures and divine masculine figures that were changed over to more fit the mold of what they were trying to make with Christianity, right? So it gets really interesting when you start researching all of these.
And it really can be a rabbit hole. Like, there's so much to learn. But, and it's so fun. Like, we were talking about that right before we hit record too. I was like, I would love to get paid to just research this stuff all the time, because it would be so much fun. But one of the things you just said kind of struck me, because in, again, my background being the Mormon church, we don't celebrate like St. Brigid's Day or any of these kind of things in the Mormon church. It's Mary is really the only divine feminine figure that comes into play. There is
Yeah.
there's no saints. There's none of that in Mormonism. So it was, and it's not called Mormonism. I'm using the wrong word. That's not what they call themselves. But it was just, it was interesting to me that you said that, because I realized like they've even sort of gone away from that even farther. And I don't know about other Christian religions, if maybe some of them have as well, but they dropped all those saints as well. And they just now, Mary is the mother of Jesus, and that's it, right? There's no like, none of the rest of that. And yeah, I never realized, I guess when I first started coming into all of this knowledge and awareness and learning about all of this and whatnot, it was interesting to me that I had only ever seen it. And that's maybe why I had such an extreme view of like how much the patriarchy took over everything, and there was no women, like we were not important, right? It was very like, it's all men. And that's maybe because there was literally no, like, we didn't even celebrate these women as saints in that sense, right? It was only men that were allowed to be saints, or only men that were allowed to be prophets or leaders or whatever, you know, all of these things in the church. So yeah, I just found that really fascinating.
Yeah, it is for sure. And I'm kind of laughing because I see a ton of memes all the time that kind of poke fun at like Catholicism in particular, like as that branch of Christianity, because like they'll say, oh, you're like, witches are worshiping the devil, witches are worshiping the devil, and they're doing all these rituals and spells, and like that's not, you know, that's evil and stuff like that. But when you look at what Catholics are doing, like they're still like they very much venerate saints, and they brought all of these saints into the modern sphere, right? And they light candles and they do prayers, and it's like it's a spell, like it's the same thing. Like
it's
so
a ritual.
are,
like we did
it's
talk
a ritual,
about that.
it's a spell. Like we're on two different sides of the coin, but basically we're doing the same thing, just in different ways. Yeah.
And really, we had like a whole episode about that, right? About how like we were talking like witchcraft, shamanism, like all of that, how like rituals and spells and all of these kinds of things. But really, exactly, that's just the other side of the coin. They also have their rituals. They also have, you know, we talk about smudging. You see, like in the Catholic Church, they wave that thing around, and it like all that smoke is coming out of it and whatever. It's the same thing, right? It's all the same thing. And that's where it's like,
I've smelled a couple
that you look at it. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, sorry, I'm getting very passionate about this. Like a couple times I've lit an incense and I'm like, oh, that smells like my childhood.
Yeah.
Like from the church.
Yeah. Well, and like to me, it's really it's funny, like it is ironic and it's funny, and we're laughing at it because we're like, it's so ridiculous, right? How they can say that that's witchcraft, and witchcraft is evil and it's worshiping Satan, but they're doing the same things. But really, they're saying this to people who just really aren't aware of that, right? They don't know that that's exactly what's going on when it comes to witchcraft, when it comes to any pagan beliefs or whatever, right? They're actually doing the same things. And they've really made them out to be these, like, they've really demonized them. And that's not a funny thing, right? That's actually really crappy. But it's when you start looking into it, and this is where I think, like, I just really want to bring this knowledge to the world. I really want people to understand, right? That it's not even about like, oh, let's beat out the Catholic or like the Christianity, like any of them. It's not about getting rid of that. It's about like, hello, let's accept everybody. We're all doing the same damn thing. Right? Yeah. Like, it's just really why are we arguing here? Like,
right. That's absolutely it.
And maybe a lot of it has to do with like straightforward, right? They were using it as a worship tool for a goddess versus a god. And that's really the only difference, right? And the part that sucks is that with paganism or with, you know, and not necessarily paganism, but like anything other than these monotheistic religions, like we were talking about, you're accepting both. You're accepting gods and goddesses. You're not just demanding that it be one, right? And that is really the difference between it's yeah, I know. I just like, and you're right. I could get so passionate about this and so carried away with it, right? But maybe let's get back on track a little bit here. But so we were talking about how, like, what is Imbolc in the first place, and you talked about when it lands. It's that midpoint between winter and spring, and Brigid being the goddess of fertility and all of that. And I actually, when I was researching, I came across the word Imbolc itself is Old Irish, and it means in the belly. So it literally is talking about that phase of fertility and like pre-birth, right? It's right before the actual spring bursting into bloom, everything coming alive again, all of that. So it has all of that fertility and that potential for growth. It's sort of encapsulated in it. And it's, so it's, again, going back to that, like, we're at the beginning of the light half of the dark half of the year, right? And we're still pregnant with that possibility and ready to birth it into the world. So what I want to sort of bring this back to now is, what are we doing? What can we do? What can our listeners do, right, at this point of the year? What is ideal as far as our practices go, as far as how we become prepared for spring? How do we get ourselves ready, ourselves and our businesses? Again, a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs. So whether that's, and whether you are or not, you can do this just for yourself, or you can do this as well for your business, right? So we'll always try to layer that in because we're both entrepreneurs and because a lot of our listeners are, right? But you can use it just for yourself or for yourself and your business. Do you want to, Kelly, maybe like give us a couple examples of things that people can do at this point that would be aligned energetically?
Yeah. So what I traditionally will do, and I've even done a couple guided practices with my Coven members and my group and things like that around these different points of the year. But a fire, sort of like a fire ceremony, I guess. So you're just like kind of, you're stirring up the creative fires of what you do want to birth into reality in the spring, and as we get into the more fertile months of spring, and like what are you creatively, kind of what is in your womb right now, right? So it's kind of thinking about that. And like you can even do a physical fire sort of like ritual or practice, like if you want to. It doesn't have to be very complicated or anything. It could be even as simple as lighting a candle, right? It's like lighting a candle is considered a fire ceremony or ritual. So you can, light that candle and just kind of imagine and like think of, what is it that you are wanting to birth into the world in the next couple of months? How are you preparing for that? What seeds are you planting in order to do that, right? How are you getting ready for spring? So it's like you can compare it to physically, literally, like getting your garden ready, right? Like in late February, early March, like for our garden, we're planting a garden in our backyard. We're gonna start kind of like nurturing the seeds indoors, right? We're gonna start nurturing them indoors so they can be prepared to go into the ground as soon as the ground is ready and is unfrozen, right? So you can kind of think of it in the same way. What are you doing to your seeds? How are you nurturing them? What is that bringing to you? What is that going to look like for you? And it's not like you have to have all the answers or anything. We never have all the answers, but we just want to start stirring these creative forces within ourselves, right? That's the whole purpose of it. And even going back to, Brigid represented fertility, creation, all of these beautiful things that, she kind of brought into the world and represented in those cultures. That's what we're thinking about in this sense. So yeah, that would definitely be a suggestion I would make, kind of doing a little ritual practice for yourself and some journaling exercises to kind of like, wrap your mind around what is it that I'm bringing and that I'm birthing into the world in the spring.
Right. And I think, so right off the bat, you said fire ceremony, and I'm thinking like, this is one of the key things with fire ceremony, in shamanism is you burn away what you want to release, but you also need to call back in what you want to replace it with. Otherwise you've got sort of this empty gaping space,
Yeah.
right? So I love that you use fire ceremony for that. I think that that's great. I always think of like when it comes to spring, the planting of the seeds part, which is the setting the intentions and deciding what you want to call in. But before you do that, you need to burn away or let go of whatever it is that's not serving you anymore. And the great thing is that we're coming out of winter, right? So winter is our phase, for reflecting and going inwards and just restoring and all of that, right? So during that phase, especially if we're following the wheel of the year, we're remembering, right? We're recalling everything that happened over the last section of the year, over the last year, all of that. And it really helps us to highlight like what went well and what didn't, right? And why, and what do we want to keep and what do we want to let go of and all of that. So this is the perfect opportunity to now take that reflection time and really look at it and intentionally let go of the parts that we don't want anymore. And really start bringing our focus and our intentions into what we want to maintain going forward. And I also wanted to sort of tie it in with, we had talked about like, sort of trying to tie the astrology and the wheel of the year together as well. And I don't know much about everything else that's going on with the astrology at this point, but I do know the new moon is January 29th, or was, I guess when people are listening to this, was January 29th, right? And then Imbulk is the 1st. So it's literally like a couple of days apart. So really new moon energy is when everything is just ripe with possibility. You can literally plant whatever seeds and intentions you want. And there's all this space and openness for that, because from the full moon where we're like overloaded and everything is just full right up and we're completely pregnant with the possibilities, we start releasing from that point down up until the new moon, where then we start calling in and bringing more back in to fill back up again, heading back towards the next full moon. So they really coincide this year, new moon and Imbulk. And
they do.
That's really great energetically, right? Like that's a really good alignment energetically as far as that goes. So definitely, if you already have a new moon practice, you can tie it in with an Imbulk practice right now. If you don't, then like Kelly was suggesting, you can do a very simple fire ceremony. You can just light a candle with the, holding the intentions of what you want to be calling in. You can also do a little bit more complex one. Like I was talking about, a shamanic fire ceremony is where you are putting your energy that you want to release into an object. So it's something that was alive. It's always something that was alive. So a leaf, like a dried leaf, is a great thing, whether that's like a bay leaf or an actual leaf from outside or whatever you want to use. And do it safely, please. But you just blow, like literally as if you're blowing on a candle against this object, whatever it is, as if you're blowing these things that you're releasing into it. And then you burn that item afterwards, and it destroys that thing that you're releasing and releases it out away from you. And without sort of, this is getting maybe a little bit off, but like without letting those intention, or without letting that stuff that you're releasing just go out into the air to go into somebody else, right? If you're releasing it because it's negative to you, so you want to actually burn it away, destroy it, not leave it around for someone else to find, right? So, and that's a very like, woo, energetic thing maybe, but that's the way that I look at it. So it's always like, do that full thing. And then, when I'm blowing into it, I'm blowing in like what I'm releasing. And then I'm also thinking of at the same time, like, what am I calling in its place? And a lot of the time with shamanic fire ceremony, you will burn that thing and you'll waft the smoke towards yourself, because the smoke of it and what's burning away is like, here's what's coming of it. So what the intentions and what you're calling in is what's coming out of that burning. And so you kind of waft the smoke towards yourself, as in you're taking in that new intention. So that's just my take on the fire ceremony part of it. And I love like the actual physical, if you're prepping your seeds for spring, this is when you do that. And I also, journaling would have been mine. That would have been the one that I would have said too, right? It's actually writing down, like, what do I want? What do I want to let go of? What do I want to call in? You know me, I love goal setting. I love like really breaking down goals in a really tangible way. That's a lot less of the sort of woo. So I could go into that all day. I won't, but like, take your time to decide what it is that you want to call in. And then, using whatever method you like to use when you're goal setting, set those goals, right? Plan them out, have all of that prepped, because when that spring energy hits, that's when all the buds start blooming, all of the shoots come out of the ground, and that's exactly it. If you set this ahead of time, that is when your manifestations start coming to pass, right? So, just all really exciting and very, I love spring energy. I love warmth and sun and, all of that. So like, it's great. I'm more of, even I love summer, but spring just gets me excited for summer. I'm always like, yes, we're starting to head into the warm months, the light months, the sunshine, and especially here in the northern hemisphere and like way up here in Canada. Hey, it's dark for so long. Like we have so few hours of daylight in the winter. So it's, and even in some parts of Canada and Alaska and stuff like that, like you're getting no hours of daylight for a good chunk of the year, right? Like that's just, I cannot imagine how depressing. I could not handle it, right? So,
No.
and I even struggle with it here where we get like, I'm dropping my kids off for school around 8:30 and it's still dark out, right? And like they've had to get up in the dark, they've had to get ready in the dark. How do you get your body energized and ready for the day in the dark? I think I need to move.
Yeah.
And then it's dark and they're like, you feel like you should be wrapping up for the day and it's dark before dinner time kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely, I get very excited for spring, very like the sun is coming back.
Oh yeah. I love it. Yeah. I'm on the same wavelength, even though I'm not quite as north as you, but we still get our darkness, and like it gets cloudy for weeks at a time sometimes, and it's just like we need the sun back. So yeah. I love
your vitamin D, people.
Yes, I love when February hits and it's like, yeah, it could still be cold sometimes here, but it's just those signs that everything's returning. Like whether it's like, the birds that you haven't seen in a while and you see one come back or something, like, just stuff like that. I love that.
Yeah. And I mean, even for, any of our listeners who are still practicing Christians or, whatever the case may be, like Easter's coming soon, right? Too. And it's that new birth, Jesus' rebirth after he died, right? 3 days later kind of thing. Like it's all that same energy. And again, this is just showing how like really we all are one. We really all are thinking the same things and doing the same things. And it's not that different. And we can work together and be more in peace with each other about it kind of thing. Right. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, I think that's all that I had as far as Imbolc goes. Did you have anything else that you wanted to mention, Kelly?
I don't think so. I think that was a pretty good overview of what it's all about. And if you're listening and you want to explore it even further, I know at least I have resources through my business in different facets, and even like a membership where you can explore all of these different celebrations in greater detail and do some rituals together and fun stuff like that. So if you're interested in anything like that, definitely come check me out, and my links are all in the show notes and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and I definitely highly recommend. I have such great experiences inside of Kelly's Coven membership. So I also, you know what, that reminded me, I had a thought that sort of like passed through while I was talking before that I wanted to mention. If you are looking for ways to figure out your intentions. So, you know, I know when I first started into all of this, it was like I would really be uncertain of what I really wanted. I was so used to doing everything for everyone else that I didn't even know what I wanted. Right. And so, one of the tools that was like just so super powerful for me back in the day, I don't even remember how many years it's been now, like 5 or 6 years maybe since I first tried it, but I love Gabby Bernstein's vision making meditation. Okay, that I believe that's what it's called. It's called the vision making meditation, and it is so powerful. And it's like you get quiet enough to hear what your inner voice has to say about what you, like really you deep down, actually wants. And that is an incredible way to sort of source your intentions and your goals and the energetic seeds that you're planting, to know what those maybe should be. And should is not the word that I want to use, but what they could be, that feels very aligned for you, instead of just like, oh, you know, I should try to manifest $1 million, or I should, like whatever, all of these things. The original one, and for me, this was like, this is maybe a story that a lot of people don't know. I don't even know if you know this story, Kelly, but the first time I ever did this vision making meditation was when I saw the symbolic vision of like what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
I was the lighthouse calling in the ships. And that is like a huge part of my brand. So for anyone that knows my brand, like you will see it in my logo, in my, on my Facebook group cover, like all of these things, there's that lighthouse in the storm calling in the ships. That was so significant that it has stuck around for years, right? So it was like massively, massively powerful. It was a really good one. I highly recommend it. And if I can remember, I'll write it down, but hopefully I'll remember. I will try to link it in the comments. I think it wasn't a free one. I think it was included with like she's got like a meditation album or like a bundle of meditations. But it was really cheap. It was not a lot, because I know at that time I did not have a lot of money, and I just was like, but I totally went for it. And I love Gabby Bernstein, and I know you love Gabby Bernstein, and probably a lot of our listeners do as well. So I will try to link.
I think it was like 11. I think $11, because I bought it too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's not a lot. I will try to link it in the show notes as well, so that anyone who is interested can go and check that out. It was just so powerful. Highly, highly recommend.
Yeah, it's funny you mention her, because every January I do her manifesting challenge. So I'm in day number 16 right now of her. It's in her app. So she has a private app you can download, and it's like a membership fee for the app. But I have done it every January for like 4 years. Nice. So I'm in the middle of it right now.
I did it once, and I haven't done it in a year since, but and not because I didn't want to. Actually, it was really good. I just haven't thought about it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. All of her stuff is good, but I love that vision making meditation too, or anything that kind of gets you in that creative space to just listen to yourself, because so often we're listening to everybody else, or we're listening to like, you should do this or do this, but if you just really need to just
gotta pay the bills, gotta do that.
Yeah, get in that space where you're just clearing all that other noise out, and just really getting intentional with listening to what is your higher self telling you that is your path forward, right? And it's hard sometimes. I'm not going to say that it's easy to do that all the time, and it depends, what else is going on and what energy is happening and like all of these other things, but just getting intentional, like you said, and at least giving yourself that time, just even if it's just a few minutes.
Yeah, and really, for those of you who are maybe entrepreneurs, or even if you're not and you're struggling financially, it can feel really hard to take the time out to just like, oh, get into your feelings and, what does your higher self want and all of this. But I have to say, from experience and from many, many other women's experience that I know of, um, when you do this and then you follow what your higher self wants, it is the fastest path to money. It doesn't feel like it because it doesn't seem logical, the things that come up, but it is the fastest path to wealth every time. So if you can trust it, if you can, let go of the outcomes enough to trust it and follow it, it is the way to go, I promise. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay. So that is our episode for you guys today. I am super excited kicking off this season. This is so much fun. I love these topics. And I'm really looking forward to talking to everybody next time.
Yes, same. I'm so excited for how this season is going to pan out. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like it and subscribe. And if you really loved it, we would love a 5-star review, which helps us reach more people with our message. Comment your thoughts on the episode below, or if you have any questions you'd like us to answer in a future episode. Talk to you next time.